The door of the parlor opened. Through it came a small, fat toddler in a grubby blue suit with tears rolling down his face. "Mom, Mom, Mom!" He was wailing as he staggered into the room. But as soon as he saw Mrs. Pendragon, his face spread into a blinding smile. He stretched out both arms and rushed to her, where he buried his face in her skirt. "Mom!" he shouted. Following him through the door came floating an agitated-looking blue creature shaped like a long teardrop with a face on the front of it. It seemed to be made of flames. It brought a gust of warmth with it and a gasp from everyone in the room. An even more agitated housemaid hurried in after it. After the housemaid came a small boy, quite the most angelic child Charmain had ever seen. He had a mass of blonde curls that clustered around his angelic pink and white face. His eyes were big and blue and bashful. His exquisite little chin rested on a frill of white lace, and the rest of his graceful little body was clothed in a pale blue velvet suit with big silver buttons. His pink rosebud mouth spread into a shy smile as he came in, showing a charming dimple in his delicate little cheek. Charmain could not think why Mrs. Pendragon was staring at him in such horror. He was surely a truly enchanting child. And what long curly eyelashes! "With my husband and his fire demon," Mrs. Pendragon finished. Her face had gone fiery red, and she glared at the little boy across the toddler's head. Chapter 8, in which Peter has trouble with the plumbing. "Oh, ma'am, sire!" the housemaid gasped. "I had to let them in. The little one was so upset." She said this into a room full of confusion. Everyone stood up and someone dropped a teacup. Sim plunged to rescue the cup, and the king dived past him to pick up the plate of crumpets. Mrs. Pendragon stood up with Morgan in her arms, still looking daggers at the small boy, while the blue teardrop creature bobbed in front of her face. "It's not my fault, Sophie," it kept saying in an agitated, crackling voice. "I swear it's not my fault. We couldn't stop Morgan crying for you." Princess Hilda rose quellingly to her feet. "You may go," she said to the housemaid. "There is no need for anyone to be upset." "Sophie, dear, I had no idea that you didn't employ a nursemaid." "No, I don't. And I was hoping for a break," Mrs. Pendragon said. "You would think," she added, glowering at the angelic little boy, "that a wizard and a fire demon could manage one small toddler between them." "Men!" said the princess. "I have no opinion of men's ability to manage anything. Of course, Morgan and the other little boy must be our guests too, now that they're here. What sort of accommodation does a fire demon require?" she asked the colorless gentleman. He looked completely blank. "I'd appreciate a good log fire," the fire demon crackled. "I see you have a nice one in this room. That's all I need. I'm Calcifer, by the way, ma'am." The princess and the colorless gentleman both looked relieved. The princess said, "Yes, of course. I believe we met briefly in Ingery 2 years ago." "And who is this other little fellow?" the king asked genially. "Thofie's my auntie," the small boy answered in a sweet lisping voice, raising his angelic face and big blue eyes to the king's. Mrs. Pendragon looked outraged. "Pleased to meet you," the king said. "And what's your name, my little man?" "Twinkle," the little boy whispered, coyly ducking his curly blonde head. "Have a crumpet, Twinkle," the king said heartily, holding the plate out. "Thank you," Twinkle said devoutly, taking a crumpet. At this, Morgan held out a fat, imperious hand and boomed, "Me, me, me," until the king gave him a crumpet too. Mrs. Pendragon sat Morgan on a sofa to eat it. Sim looked around and resourcefully fetched a cloth from the trolley. It became soaked in butter almost at once. Morgan beamed up at Sim, the princess, the lady-in-waiting, and the chancellor, with his face all shiny. "Dump it," he said. "Do dump it." While this was going on, Charmain became aware that Mrs. Pendragon had somehow trapped little Twinkle behind the sofa she was sitting on. She could not help but overhear Mrs. Pendragon demanding, "What do you think you're doing, Hal?" She sounded so fierce that Waif jumped into Charmain's lap and cowered there. "They forgot to invite me," Twinkle's sweet little voice replied. That dilly, you can't thort out thith meth on your own, Thuffy. You need me. No, I do not, Sophie retorted. And do you have to lisp like that? Yes, said Twinkle. Do, said Sophie. It's not funny how, and you've dragged Morgan here. I tell you, Twinkle interrupted her, Morgan did not stop crying from the moment you left. Ask Calcifer if you don't believe me. Calcifer's as bad as you are, Sophie said passionately. I don't believe either of you so much as tried to stop him. Did you? You were just looking for an excuse to launch this masquerade on poor Princess Hilda. She neath ooth, Sophie, Twinkle said earnestly. Charmain was quite fascinated by this conversation, but unfortunately Morgan looked round for his mother just then and spotted Waif trembling on Charmain's knee. He gave a loud cry, doggy, slid off his sofa, trampling the cloth as he went, and rushed at Waif with both buttery hands out. Waif jumped desperately onto the back of the sofa where she stood and yapped like a shrill version of someone with a hacking cough. Charmain was forced to pick Waif up and back away, out of Morgan's reach, so that all she heard next of the strange conversation behind the sofa was Mrs. Pendragon saying something about sending Twinkle, or was his name Hal, to bed without supper, and Twinkle daring her to just try it. As Waif quieted down, Twinkle said wistfully, Don't you think I'm pretty at all? There was a strange hollow thump then, as if Mrs. Pendragon had so far forgotten good behavior as to stamp her foot. Yes, Charmain heard her say, disgustingly pretty. Well, said Princess Hilda over near the fire, while Charmain was still backing away from Morgan, things are certainly lively with children around. Sim, give Morgan a muffin, quickly. Morgan at once reversed direction and ran toward Sim and the muffins. Charmain heard her own hair frizzle. She looked round and found the fire demon hovering beside her shoulder, looking at her with flaming orange eyes. Who are you? The demon said. Charmain's heart thumped a little, although Waif seemed perfectly calm. If I hadn't just met a Lubbock, Charmain thought, I'd be quite frightened of this Calcifer. I'm only the temporary help in the library, she said. Then we'll need to talk to you later. Calcifer crackled. You reek of magic, did you know? You and your dog. She's not my dog. She belongs to a wizard, Charmain said. This wizard Norland who seems to have messed things up? Calcifer asked. Great Uncle William messed things up, Charmain said. He seems to have looked in all the wrong places, Calcifer said. You don't need to be nasty to make a mess. Look at Morgan. And he whisked away. He had this way, Charmain thought, of vanishing in one place and turning up in another, like a dragonfly flicking about over a pond. The king came across to Charmain, jovially wiping his hands on a large, crisp napkin. Better get back to work, my dear. We have to tidy up for the night. Yes, of course, sire, Charmain said, and followed him toward the door. Before they got there, the angelic Twinkle somehow escaped from the angry Mrs. Pendragon and pulled at the sleeve of the lady in waiting. Please, he asked charmingly, do you have any toys? The lady looked nonplussed. I don't play with toys, dear, she said. Morgan caught the word from her. Doy, he shouted, waving both arms, with a buttery muffin clutched in one fist. Doy, doy, doy! A jack-in-the-box landed in front of Morgan, bursting its lid open so that the jack popped out with a boing. A large dollhouse crashed down beside it, followed by a shower of elderly teddy bears. An instant later, a shabby rocking horse established itself next to the tea trolley. Morgan shouted with delight. I think we'll leave my daughter to cope with her guests, the king said, ushering Charmain and Waif out of the parlor. He shut the door upon more and more toys appearing, and the child Twinkle looking highly demure, while everyone else ran about in confusion. Wizards are often very vigorous guests, the king remarked on the way back to the library, although I had no idea they started so young. A bit trying for their mothers, I imagine. Half an hour later, Charmain was on her way back to Great Uncle William's house with Waif pattering behind her, looking as demure as the child Twinkle. "Oof!" Charmain said to her. "You know, Waif, I've never lived so much life in 3 days ever." She felt a bit wistful all the same. It made sense for the king to give her the bills and love letters, but she did wish they could have taken turns with the books. She would have loved to spend some of the day at least going through a thoroughly elderly and musty leather-bound volume. It was what she had been hoping for. But never mind. As soon as she got back to Great Uncle William's house, she could bury herself in the 12-branch wand, or perhaps Memoirs of an Exorcist would be better, since it seemed to be the kind of book you were happier to read by daylight. Or try a different book altogether, maybe? She was looking forward so much to a good read that she hardly noticed the walk, except to pick Waif up again when Waif began panting and toiling. With Waif in her arms, she kicked Great Uncle William's gate open and found herself confronting Rollo halfway up the path, scowling all over his small blue face. "What is it now?" Charmain said to him, and seriously wondered whether to pick Rollo up too and throw him into the hydrangeas. Rollo was small enough to hurl beautifully, even when she had one arm wrapped round Waif. "Them flower heads you got all over that outside table," Rollo said. "You expect me to stick them back on or something?" "No, of course not," Charmain said. "They're drying in the sun. Then I'll have them in the house." "Huh," said Rollo. "Prettifying in there, are you? How do you think the wizard'll like that?" "None of your business," Charmain said haughtily, and strode forward so that Rollo was forced to hop out of her way. He shouted something after her as she was opening the front door, but she did not bother to listen. She knew it was rude. She slammed the door shut on his yells. Indoors, the smell of the living room was more than musty. It was like a stagnant pond. Charmain put Waif on the floor and sniffed suspiciously. So did Waif. Long brown fingers of something were oozing under the door to the kitchen. Waif tiptoed up to them warily. Charmain, equally warily, put out her toe and prodded the nearest brown trickle. It squished like a marsh. "Oh, what has Peter done now?" Charmain exclaimed. She flung the door open. 2 inches of water rippled all over the kitchen floor. Charmain could see it seeping darkly up the 6 bags of laundry beside the sink. "Doe!" she cried out, slammed the door shut, opened it again, and turned left. The corridor there was awash. Sunlight from the end window flared on the water in a way that suggested a strong current coming from the bathroom. Angrily, Charmain splashed her way there. "All I wanted to do was sit down and read a book," she thought, "and I come home to a flood." As she reached the bathroom, with Waif paddling unhappily after her, its door opened and Peter shot out of it, damp down his front and looking thoroughly harassed. He had no shoes on, and his trousers were rolled up to his knees. "Oh, good, you're back," he said before Charmain could speak. "There's this hole in one of the pipes in here. I've tried 6 different spells to stop it, but all they do is make it move about. I was just going to turn the water off at that woolly tank through there, or try to anyway, but perhaps you could do something instead." "Woolly tank?" Charmain said. "Oh, you mean that thing covered in blue fur. What makes you think that will do any good? Everywhere's flooded." "It's the only thing I haven't tried," Peter snarled at her. "The water has to come from there somehow. You can hear it trickling. I thought I might find a stopcock." "Oh, you're useless," Charmain snarled back. "Let me have a look." She pushed Peter aside and flounced into the bathroom, raising a sheet of water as she went. There was indeed a hole. One of the pipes between the wash basin and the bath had a lengthwise slit in it, and water was spraying out of it in a merry fountain. Here and there along the pipe were gray, magical-looking blobs which must have been Peter's 6 useless spells. "And this is all his fault," she snarled to herself. He was the one who made the pipes red hot. "Oh, honestly?" She rushed at the spraying slit and angrily planted both hands on it. "Stop this," she commanded. Water sprayed out round her hands and into her face. "Stop it at once." All that happened was that the slit moved sideways from under her fingers for about 6 inches and sprayed water over her pigtail and her right shoulder. Charmain scooped her hands along to cover it again. "Stop that! Stop it! The slit moved off sideways again. So that's how you want it, is it? Charmain said to it, and scooped some more. The slit moved off. She followed it with her hands. In a moment or so she had it cornered above the bath, and the water spraying harmlessly into the bath and running away down the plug hole. She kept it there by leaning on the pipe with one hand while she thought what next to do. I wonder Peter didn't think of this, she thought in a sort of mutter, instead of running about casting useless spells. Great Uncle William, she called out, how do I stop the bathroom pipe leaking? There was no answer. This was obviously not something Great Uncle William thought Charmain would need to know. I don't think he knows much about plumbing, Peter said from the doorway. There's nothing useful in the suitcase either. I had it all out to see. Oh, did you? Charmain said nastily. Yes, some of the stuff in there is really interesting, Peter said. I'll show you if you... Be quiet and let me think, Charmain snapped at him. Peter seemed to realize that Charmain might not be in a very good mood. He stopped talking and waited while Charmain stood in the bath and leaned on the pipe thinking. You had to come at this leak 2 ways so that it couldn't slide off again. First you fixed it in one place and then you covered it up. But how? Quick, before my feet are quite soaked. Peter, she said, go and get me some dishcloths. At least 3. Why? Said Peter. You don't think. Now, said Charmain. To her relief, Peter went crossly splashing off, muttering about bossy, bad-tempered cats. Charmain pretended not to hear. Meanwhile, she dared not let go of the slit, and the slit kept spraying, and she was getting wetter every second. Oh, blast, Peter! She put her other hand on the farther end of the slit and began pushing and sliding her hands together as hard as she could. Close up, she ordered the pipe. Stop leaking and close up. Water spouted rudely into her face. She could feel the slit trying to dodge, but she refused to let it. She pushed and pushed. I can do magic, she thought at the pipe. I worked a spell. I can make you close up, so close up. And it worked. By the time Peter came wading back with just 2 cloths, saying those were all he could. Fine, Charmain was soaked through to her underclothes, but the pipe was whole again. Charmain took the cloths and bound them around the pipe on either side of where the slit had been. Then she snatched up the long back brush from beside the bath, this being the only thing remotely like a wizard's staff that she could see, and batted at the cloths with it. Stay there, don't dare move, she told the cloths. She batted at the mended slit. You stay shut, she told it, or it'll be the worse for you. After that, she turned the back brush on Peter's blobby gray spells and batted at them too. Go, she told them. Go away, you're useless. And they all obediently vanished. Charmain, flushed with a sense of great power, batted at the hot tap beside her knees. Run hot again, she told it, and let's have no nonsense. And you, she added, reaching across to bat at the hot tap on the wash basin. Both hot, but not too hot, or I'll give you grief. But you stay running cold, she instructed the cold taps, batting them. Finally, she came out of the bath with a great splash and batted at the water on the floor. And you go! Go on, dry up, drain away, go, or else. Peter waded over to the wash basin, turned the hot tap on, and held his hand under it. It's warm, he said. You really did it. That's a relief. Thanks. Huh, said Charmain, soaked and cold and grumpy. Now I'm going to change into dry clothes and read a book. Asked rather pathetically, aren't you going to help mop up? Charmain did not see why she should, but her eye fell on poor Waif, struggling toward her with water lapping at her underside. It did not look as if the back brush had worked on the floors. All right, she sighed. But I have done a day's work already, you know. So have I, Peter said feelingly. I was rushing about all day trying to stop that pipe leaking. Let's get the kitchen dry at least. As the fire was still leaping and crackling in the kitchen grate, it was not unlike a steam bath in there. Charmain waded through the tepid water and opened the window. Apart from the mysteriously multiplying laundry bags, which were sodden everywhere but the floor was dry. This included the suitcase open on the table. Behind Charmain, Peter spoke strange words and Waif whimpered. Charmain whirled round to find Peter with his arms stretched out. Little flames were flickering on them from his fingers to his shoulders. "Dry, or water's on the floor," he intoned. Flames began to flicker across his hair and down his damp front, too. His face changed from smug to alarmed. "Oh, dear," he said. As he said this, the flames rippled all over him and he began to burn quite fiercely. By then he looked plain frightened. "It's hot! Help!" Charmain rushed at him, seized one of his blazing arms, and pushed him over into the water on the floor. This did no good at all. Charmain stared at the extraordinary sight of flames flickering away under the water and simmering bubbles appearing all round Peter, where the water was starting to boil, and hauled him up again double quick in a shower of hot water and steam. "Cancel it!" she shouted, snatching her hands off his hot sleeve. "What spell did you use?" "I don't know how," Peter wailed. "What spell?" Charmain bawled at him. It was the spell to stop floods in the Boak Opalimpsest. Peter babbled, "And I've no idea how to cancel it." "Oh, you are stupid!" Charmain cried out. She grabbed him by one flaming shoulder and shook him. "Cancel spell!" she shouted. "Ouch, spell! I order you to cancel at once!" The spell obeyed her. Charmain stood shaking her scorched hand and watched the flames vanish in a sizzle, a cloud of steam, and a wet, singeing smell. It left Peter looking brown and frizzled all over. His face and hands were bright pink and his hair was noticeably shorter. "Thanks," he said, flopping over with relief. Charmain pushed him upright. "Pooh, you smell of burned hair. How can you be so stupid? What other spells have you been doing?" "Nothing," Peter said, raking burned bits out of his hair. Charmain was fairly sure he was lying, but if he was, Peter was not going to confess. And it wasn't that stupid, he argued. "Look at the floor." Charmain looked down to see that the water had mostly gone. The floor was once again simply tiles, wet, shiny, and steaming, but not flooded any longer. "Then you've been very lucky," she said. "I mostly am," Peter said. "My mother always says that too, whenever I do a spell that goes wrong. I think I'm going to have to change into different clothes." "Me too," Charmain said. They went through the inner door, where Peter tried to turn right and Charmain pushed him left so that they went straight and arrived in the living room. The wet trickles on the carpet there were steaming and drying out rapidly, but the room still smelled horrible. Charmain snorted, turned Peter round, and pushed him left through the door again. Here the corridor was damp, but not full of water any longer. "See?" Peter said as he went into his bedroom. "It did work." "Huh," Charmain said, going into her own room. "I wonder what else he's done. I don't trust him an inch." Her best clothes were a wet mess. Charmain took them off sadly and hung them around the room to get dry. And nothing was going to cure the big scorch mark down the front of her best jacket. She would have to wear ordinary clothes tomorrow when she went to the royal mansion. And do I dare leave Peter alone here, she wondered. I bet he'll spend the time experimenting with spells. I know I would. She shrugged a little as she realized she was no better than Peter really. She had been quite unable to resist the spells in the Boak Opalimpsest either. She was feeling much more kindly toward Peter when she came back to the kitchen, dry again except for her hair, and wearing her oldest clothes and her slippers. "Find out how to ask for supper," Peter said, as Charmain put her wet shoes to dry in the hearth. "I'm starving." He was looking much more comfortable in the old blue suit that he had arrived in. "There's food in the bag Mother brought yesterday," Charmain said, busy arranging the shoes in the best place. "No, there isn't," Peter said. "I ate it all for lunch." Charmain stopped feeling kindly toward Peter. "Greedy pig," she said, banging on the fireplace for food for Waif. Waif, in spite of all the crumpets she had eaten in the royal mansion, was delighted to see the latest dog dish. "And so are you a greedy pig," Charmain said, watching Waif gobble. "Where do you put it all?" "Great Uncle William, how do we get supper?" The kindly voice was very faint now. "Just knock on the pantry door and say, 'Supper, my dear.'" Peter got to the pantry first. "Supper," he bellowed, banging hard on the door. There was a knobby flopping sound from the table. Both of them whirled round to look. There, lying beside the open suitcase, were a small lamb chop, 2 onions, and a turnip. Charmain and Peter stared at them. "All raw," Peter said, stunned. "And not enough anyway," Charmain said. "Do you know how to cook it?" "No," said Peter. "My mother does all the cooking in our—" "Oh," said Charmain. "Honestly." Chapter 9, How Great Uncle William's House Proved to Have Many Ways. Peter and Charmain naturally converged on the fireplace then. Waif scuttled out of the way as, one after another, they beat on the mantelpiece and cried out, "Breakfast!" But it seemed that this spell only worked properly in the morning. "I wouldn't even have minded kippers," Charmain said, miserably surveying the 2 trays. They had rolls, honey, and orange juice on them, and nothing else. "I know how to boil eggs," Peter said. "Will Waif eat this lamb chop?" "She'll eat almost anything," Charmain said. "She's as bad as we are. I don't think she'll eat a turnip, though. I wouldn't—" They had a somewhat unsatisfactory supper. Peter's eggs were, well, solid. In order to take Charmain's mind off them, Peter asked her about her time in the royal mansion. Charmain told him in order to take both their minds off the way hard-boiled eggs did not mix with honey. Peter was highly intrigued by the way the king seemed to be looking for gold, and even more intrigued by the arrival of Morgan and Twinkle. "And a fire demon?" he said. "2 infants with magical powers and a fire demon. I bet the princess has her hands full. How long are they staying?" "I don't know. Nobody said," Charmain said. "Then I bet you 2 afternoon teas and a morning coffee that the princess turns them out before the weekend," Peter said. "Have you finished eating? Then I want you to look through your great-uncle's suitcase." "But I want to read a book," Charmain protested. "No, you don't," Peter said. "You can do that any time. This suitcase is full of stuff you need to know. I'll show you." He pushed the breakfast trays aside and pulled the suitcase in front of her. Charmain sighed and put her glasses on. The suitcase was full to the brim with paper. Lying on top was a note in Great-Uncle William's beautiful but shaky writing. For Charmain, it said. Key to the house. Under that was a large sheet of paper with a tangle of swirly lines drawn on it. The lines had labeled boxes drawn on them at intervals, and each line ended in an arrow at the edge of the page with the word "Unexplored" written beside it. "That's the short key you got there," Peter said as Charmain picked his paper up. "The rest of the stuff in the suitcase is the proper map. It folds out. Look." He took hold of the next sheet of paper and pulled, and it came out with the next sheet joined to it, and then the next, folded back and forth to fit in the suitcase. It came out onto the table in a huge zigzag. Charmain stared at it resentfully. Each piece had carefully drawn rooms and corridors on it and neatly written notes beside each thing. The notes said things like, "Turn left twice here and 2 steps right and 1 left here." The rooms had blocks of writing in them, some simple, like kitchen, and some eloquent, like the one that read, "My store of wizardly supplies, kept constantly replenished by an intake spell I am rather proud of. Please note that the ingredients on the left-hand wall are all highly dangerous and must be handled with great care," and some of the joined sheets seem to be all crisscrossing corridors labeled to unexplored north section, to kobolds, to main cistern, or to ballroom. "I doubt if we shall ever find a use for this." "I was quite right to leave this suitcase shut," Charmain said. "It's the most confusing map I ever saw in my life. It can't all be this house." "It is. It's enormous," Peter said. "And if you look, you'll see that the way the map is folded is a clue to how you get to the different parts of it. See, here's the living room on the top page, but if you go to the next page, you don't get his study or the bedrooms because those are folded back. See, you get the kitchen instead because that's folded the same way." Charmain's head began to go round, and she closed her ears to Peter's enthusiastic explanations. She looked at the swirling lines on the piece of paper in her hand instead. It almost seemed easier. At least she could see kitchen right in the middle of it, and bedrooms and swimming pool and study. Swimming pool? Not really, surely. An interesting swirl led off to the right, underneath these boxes into a tangle containing a box labeled conference room. An arrow pointed off from this box labeled to royal mansion "Oh," she exclaimed, "you can get to the king's house from here, out to a mountain meadow that says stables, but I can't see how to get there from his workroom yet," Peter expounded, unfolding another zigzag. "And here's food store. It says stasis spells operate. I wonder how you take those off. But what interests me are the places like this one, where he's written storage space. Just junk? Must investigate someday." "Do you think he created all this bent space himself, or did he find it already there when he moved in?" "He found it," Charmain said. "You can tell by these arrows that say unexplored that he doesn't know what's out there yet." "You may be right," Peter said judiciously. "He really only uses the middle bits, doesn't he? We can do him a favor by exploring more of it." "You can if you like," Charmain said. "I'm going to read my book." She folded up the paper with the swirly lines on it and stowed it in her pocket. This could save her a journey in the morning. In the morning, Charmain's good clothes were still damp. She had to leave them draped depressingly around her room and get into her next nicest, while she wondered if she could manage to leave Waif behind with Peter today. Perhaps not. Suppose Peter tried another spell and contrived to turn Waif inside out or something. Waif, of course, came trotting eagerly after Charmain into the kitchen. Charmain tapped the fireplace for dog food and then, a little doubtfully, for her own breakfast. It could be that she and Peter had thrown the spell out by demanding breakfast yesterday evening. But no, today she got a full tray, with a choice of tea or coffee and toast, and a plate piled high with something made with fish and rice, and a peach to follow. "I think the spell's apologizing," she thought. She didn't like the fish stuff much, so she gave most of it to Waif, who liked it the way she always liked food and smelled quite fishy as she trotted after Charmain when Charmain unfolded her swirly paper, ready to go to the royal mansion. Looking at the swirls confused Charmain, she found she had been even more confused by the chart in the suitcase. Bending the paper backward and forward to try and reproduce what was in the suitcase did not help at all. After several turns left and right, she found herself walking into a place that was large and well lighted by big windows overlooking the river. There was a fine view of the town across the river where, most frustratingly, she could see the golden roof of the royal mansion gleaming in the sunlight. "But I'm trying to get there, not here," she said, looking around. There were long wooden tables under the windows, loaded with strange implements and more implements stacked in the middle of the room. The other walls were full of shelves piled with jars, tins, and odd-shaped glassware. Charmain sniffed the smell of new wood here, which was overlaid by the same thunderstorm and spice smell she had noticed in Great Uncle William's study. The smell of magic having been done, she thought. This must be his workroom. To judge by the way Waif was trotting cheerily about, Waif knew this place well. "Come on, Waif," Charmain said, pausing to look at a piece of paper on top of the strange implements in the middle of the room. It said, "Please do not touch. Let's go back to the kitchen and start again." It did not work out that way. A left turn from the workroom door brought them into a warm place open to the sky, where a small blue pool rippled amid white stone surrounds. The place was fenced off by white stone trellises with roses growing up them, and there were white reclining chairs beside the roses, piled with large fluffy towels, ready for when you'd finished swimming, Charmain supposed. But poor Waif was terrified of this place. She crouched against the gateway, whining and trembling. Charmain picked her up. "Did someone try to drown you, Waif? Were you a puppy someone didn't want? It's all right. I'm not going near this water either. I've no idea how to swim." As she turned left through the gateway, it occurred to her that swimming was only one of a very large number of things she had no idea how to do. Peter had been right to object to her ignorance. "It's not that I'm lazy," she explained to Waif as they arrived in what seemed to be the stables, or stupid. "I've just not bothered to look round the edges of Mother's way of doing things, you see." The stables were rather smelly. Charmain was relieved to see that the horses that must belong there were up in a meadow beyond a fence. Horses were another thing she had no idea about. At least Waif did not seem to be frightened here. Charmain sighed, put waif down, scrabbled up her glasses, and looked at the confusing swirly chart again. Stables were here, up in the mountains somewhere. She needed 2 right turns from there to the kitchen again. She turned right twice, with waif pattering behind, and found herself in near dark outside what seemed to be a large cave full of hurrying blue kobolds. Each one of them turned and glowered at Charmain. Charmain hurriedly turned right again, and this time she was in a store for cups, plates, and teapots. Waif whined. Charmain stared at several hundred teapots in rows on shelves of every possible color and size, and began to panic. It was getting late. Worse than that, when she put her glasses on again and consulted the plan, she found she was somewhere near the bottom left-hand part of the swirls, where the arrow pointing off to the edge had a note that said, "A group of Lubbikins live down this way. Care necessary?" "Oh!" Charmain exclaimed. "This is ridiculous. Come on, waif." She opened the door they had just come through and turned right yet again. This time they were in complete darkness. Charmain could feel waif nosing anxiously up against her ankles. Both of them sniffed, and Charmain said, "Ah." This place had a damp stone smell that she remembered from the day she had arrived in the house. "Great Uncle William," she asked, "how do I get from here to the kitchen again?" Much to her relief, the kindly voice answered. It sounded very faint and far away now. "If you are there, my dear, you are rather lost, so listen carefully. Make one turn clockwise." Charmain had no need to listen any more. Instead of making a complete turn, she turned carefully halfway and then peered forward. Sure enough, there was a dimly lighted stone corridor ahead, crossing the one she seemed to be standing in. She strode thankfully toward it, with waif trotting behind her, and turned into that corridor. She knew she was now in the royal mansion. It was the same corridor where she had seen Sim pushing a trolley on her first day in Great Uncle William's house. Not only did it smell right, with faint foody smells on top of the damp stone smell, but the walls had the typical royal mansion look, with lighter squares and oblongs where pictures had been taken away. The only trouble was that she had no idea whereabouts in the mansion this was. Waif was no help. She simply plastered herself against Charmain's ankles and shivered. Charmain picked waif up and walked down the corridor, hoping to find somewhere she knew. She turned 2 corners without being any the wiser, and then almost ran into the colorless gentleman who had passed the crumpets round yesterday. He jumped backward, thoroughly startled. "Dear me," he said, peering at Charmain in the gloom. "I had no idea you had arrived yet, Miss... Charming, is it? Are you lost? Can I assist?" "Yes, please," Charmain said resourcefully. "I went to the one for ladies, and I must have turned the wrong way afterward. Can you tell me the way back to the library?" "I can do better than that," said the colorless gentleman. "I'll show you. Just follow me." He turned round and led the way back where he had been coming from, along another dim corridor and across a large cold lobby where a flight of stone stairs led upward. Waif's tail began to twitch slightly, as if she found this part familiar, but her tail stopped moving as they crossed in front of the stairs. Morgan's voice came booming down from the top of the flight. "Don't want to! Don't want! Don't want!" Twinkle's shriller voice joined in. "I can't wear these! I want my twipey one!" Sophie Pendragon's voice echoed down too. "Be quiet, both of you, or I'll do something dreadful, I warn you. I've no patience left." The colorless gentleman winced. He said to Charmain, "Small children bring so much life to a place, don't they?" Charmain looked up at him, meaning to nod and grin, but something made her shudder instead. She was not sure why. She managed to give a little nod, and that was all, before she followed the gentleman through an archway where the booming of Morgan and the screaming of Twinkle died away into the distance. Round another corner the colorless gentleman opened a door that Charmain recognized as the door to the library. "Miss Charming seems to have arrived, sire," he said, bowing. "Oh, good," said the king, looking up from a pile of thin leather books. "Come in and sit down, my dear. I found an absolute heap of papers for you last night. I'd no idea we had so many." Charmain felt as if she had never been away. Waif settled down, rolled tummy upward in the heat from the brazier. Charmain settled down also in front of a toppling heap of different sized papers, found pen and paper, and started in. It was very companionable. After a while, the king said, "This ancestor of mine who wrote these diaries fancied himself as a poet. What do you think of this one?" To his lady love, of course. "You dance with the grace of a goat, my love, and you sing soft like a cow on the mountains. Would you call that romantic, my dear?" Charmain laughed. "It's dreadful. I hope she threw him over. Your Majesty, who is the color? The gentleman who showed me in just now." "You mean my steward?" the king said. "Do you know he's been with us for years and years and years, and I can never remember the poor fellow's name. You'll have to ask the princess, my dear. She remembers things like that." "Oh, well," Charmain thought, "I should just have to think of him as the colorless gentleman then." The day passed peacefully. It made, Charmain felt, a pleasant change after such a hectic start. She sorted out and made notes about bills from 200 years ago, bills from 100 years ago, and bills from a mere 40 years back. Oddly enough, the older bills were for much larger sums of money than the newer ones. It looked as if the royal mansion was spending less and less. Charmain also sorted out letters from 400 years back and more recent reports from ambassadors from Strangia, Engari, and even Rajput. Some ambassadors sent poems. Charmain read the worst ones out to the king. Farther down the stack, she came upon receipts, papers saying things like, "In payment for portrait of a lady, reputed to be by a grand master, 200 guineas began to turn up more and more frequently, all from the last 60 years. It looked to Charmain as if the royal mansion had been selling its pictures for most of the king's reign. She decided not to ask the king about it. Lunch arrived, more of Jamal's delicious spicy things. When Sim brought them, Waif jumped up, wagging her tail, stopped, looked disappointed, and trotted away out of the library. Charmain had no idea if it was the cook's dog or lunch that Waif wanted. Lunch, probably. As Sim put the platter on the table, the king asked jovially, "How are things going out there now, Sim?" "A little noisily, sire," Sim replied. "We have just received our 6th rocking horse. Master Morgan seems desirous of a live monkey, which, I am glad to report, Mrs. Pendragon has refused to allow him to have." A certain uproar resulted. In addition, Master Twinkle seems convinced that someone is denying him a pair of stripy trousers. He has been very loud on the subject all morning, sire, and the fire demon has adopted the fire in the front parlor as his roosting place of choice. "Will you be taking tea with us in the front parlor today, sire?" "I think not," the king said. "I've nothing against the fire demon, but it gets a bit crowded in there with all those rocking horses. Be good enough to fetch us some crumpets here to the library, if you will, Sim." "Certainly, sire," Sim said, shakily backing from the room. When the door was shut, the king said to Charmain, "It's not the rocking horses, really, and I quite like the noise, but it all makes me think how much I'd have enjoyed being a grandfather. Pity that, said Charmain. "People in town always say that Princess Hilda was disappointed in love. Is that why she never married?" The king seemed surprised. "Not that I know of," he said. "She had princes and dukes lining up to marry her for years when she was younger, but she's not the marrying kind, never fancied the idea, so she tells me, prefers her life here, helping me. It's a pity, though. Here's my heir having to be Prince Ludovic, my fool of a cousin's son. You'll meet him soon, if we can only move a rocking horse or so, or maybe she'll use the grand parlor instead. But the real pity is that there are no more youngsters around the mansion nowadays. I miss that." The king did not seem too unhappy. He looked matter-of-fact rather than mournful, but Charmain was suddenly struck by what a sad place the royal mansion really was. Huge, empty, and sad. "I understand, your majesty," she said. The king grinned and bit into a Jamal tasty. "I know you do," he said. "You're a very intelligent young lady. You'll do your great-uncle William great credit one day." Charmain blinked a bit at this description. But before she could get too uncomfortable at being praised, she realized what the king had left out. I may be clever, she thought quite sadly, but I'm not in the least kind or sympathetic. I think I may even be hard-hearted. Look at the way I treat Peter. She brooded on this for the rest of the afternoon. The result was that when it was time to stop for the day and Sim reappeared with Waif wandering along after him, Charmain stood up and said, "Thank you for being so good to me, Your Majesty." The king seemed surprised and told her to think nothing of it. But I do, Charmain thought. He's been so kind that it should be a lesson to me, as she followed Sim's slow totter. With Waif, who seemed very sleepy and fat, toiling along behind both of them, Charmain made a resolution to be kind to Peter when she got back to Great Uncle William's house. Sim had almost reached the front door when Twinkle came rushing past from somewhere, energetically bowling a large hoop. He was followed at speed by Morgan, holding both arms out and bellowing, "Oop, boop, boop." Sim was sent reeling. Charmain tried to flatten herself against the wall as Twinkle shot past. There was an instant when she thought that Twinkle gave her a strange, searching look as he whipped by, but a yelp from Waif sent her speeding to the rescue, and she thought no more about it. Waif had been knocked upside down and was very upset about it. Charmain scooped her up and nearly ran into Sophie Pendragon, chasing after Morgan. "Which way?" Sophie panted. Charmain pointed. Sophie hauled her skirts high and raced off, muttering something about guts and garters as she ran. Princess Hilda appeared in the distance and stopped to drag Sim to his feet. "I really do apologize, Miss Charming," she said as Charmain reached her. "That child is like an eel. Well, they both are, actually. I shall have to take steps, or poor Sophie will have no attention left for our problems. Are you steady now, Sim?" "Perfectly, ma'am," said Sim. He bowed to Charmain and led her out through the front door into bright afternoon sunlight, as if nothing had happened. "If I ever marry," Charmain thought, striding across Royal Square with Waif in her arms, "I shall never have children. They would make me cruel and hard-hearted after a week. Perhaps I shall be like Princess Hilda and never marry. That way I might stand a chance of learning to be kind. Anyway, I shall practice on Peter because he's truly hard work." She was full of sternly kind resolve when she reached Great Uncle William's house. It helped, as she marched up the path between the ranks of blue hydrangeas, that there was no sign of Rollo. Being kind to Rollo was something Charmain was sure she could never do. Not humanly possible, she remarked to herself as she put Waif down on the living room carpet. The room struck her as being unusually clean and tidy. Everything was orderly, from the suitcase neatly put back beside one of the armchairs to the vase of variously colored hydrangeas on the coffee table. Charmain frowned at this vase. It was surely the one that had disappeared when it was put on the trolley. Maybe Peter ordered morning coffee and it came back then, she thought, rather vaguely, because she suddenly remembered that she had left damp clothing all over her bedroom and bedclothes trailing over the floor. "Bother, I have to tidy up." She stopped short in the doorway of her bedroom. Someone had made her bed. Her clothes, dry now, were neatly folded on top of the chest of drawers. It was an outrage. Feeling anything but kind, Charmain stormed into the kitchen. Peter was sitting at the kitchen table, looking so virtuous that Charmain knew he had been up to something. Behind him, on the fire, a large black pot was bubbling out strange, weak, savory smells. "What do you mean by tidying up my room?" Charmain demanded. Peter looked injured, even though Charmain could tell he was full of secret, exciting thoughts. "I thought you'd be pleased," he said. "Well, I'm not," Charmain said. She was surprised to find herself almost in tears. "I was just beginning to learn that if I drop something on the floor, it stays dropped unless I pick it up. And if I make a mess, I have to clear it away because it doesn't go by itself, and then you go and clear it up for me. You're as bad as my mother." "I've got to do something while I'm alone here all day," Peter protested. "Or do you expect me to just sit here?" "You can do anything you like," Charmain yelled. "Dance, stand on your head, make faces at Rollo, but don't spoil my learning process." "Feel free to learn," Peter retorted. "You've got a long way to go. I won't touch your room again." Are you interested in some of the things I've learned today, or are you thoroughly self-centered? Charmain gulped. I was meaning to be kind to you this evening, but you make it very difficult. My mother says difficulties help you learn, Peter said. You should be pleased. I'll tell you one thing I've learned today, and that's how to get enough supper. He pointed with his thumb to the bubbling pot. That thumb had a piece of green string round it. The other thumb had red string, and one of his fingers was decorated with blue string. He's been trying to go in 3 directions at once, Charmain thought, striving mightily to sound friendly. She said, How do you get enough supper then? I kept banging on the pantry door, Peter said, until enough things landed on the table. Then I put them in that pot to boil. Charmain looked at the pot. What things? Liver and bacon, Peter said. Cabbage, more turnips and a chunk of rabbit, onions, 2 more chops and a leek. It was easy, really. Yee, thought Charmain. In order not to say something really rude, she turned round to go to the living room. Peter called after her, Don't you want to know how I got that vase of flowers back? You sat on the trolley, Charmain said coldly, and went away to read the 12-branched wand. But it was no good. She kept looking up and seeing that vase of hydrangeas, and then looking over at the trolley and wondering if Peter had truly sat there and vanished away with an afternoon tea. Then wondering how he had got back. And every time she looked, she was more aware that her resolve to be kind to Peter had come to absolutely nothing. She stood it for nearly an hour, and then went back to the kitchen. I apologize, she said. How did you get the flowers back? Peter was prodding at the stuff in the pot with a spoon. I don't think this is ready yet, he said. This spoon bounces off. Oh, come on, Charmain said. I'm being polite. I'll tell you over supper, Peter said. He kept his word maddeningly. He hardly said a word for an hour, until the contents of the pot had been shared into 2 bowls. Dividing the food was not easy, because Peter had not bothered to peel anything or cut it up before he put it in the pot. They had to hack the cabbage apart with 2 spoons. Nor had Peter remembered that a stew needs salt. Everything, white, soggy bacon, hunk of rabbit, whole turnip and flabby onion, floated in weak, watery juice. To put it mildly, the food was quite horrible. Doing her best to be kind, Charmain did not say it was. The only good thing was that Waif liked it. That is to say, she lapped up the weak juice and then carefully ate the meaty bits out from among the cabbage. Charmain did much the same and tried not to shudder. She was glad to take her mind off it by listening to what Peter had to tell. Are you aware, he began, rather pompously to Charmain's mind. But she could tell that he had everything worked out in his mind like a story and was going to tell it just as he had it worked out. Are you aware that when things vanish from the trolley, they go back into the past? Well, I suppose the past makes quite a good waste dump, Charmain said, as long as you make sure it really is past and things don't turn up again all moldy. Do you want to hear or not? Peter demanded. Be kind, Charmain told herself. She ate another piece of nasty cabbage and nodded. And that parts of this house are in the past? Peter continued. I didn't sit on the trolley, you know. I just went exploring with the list of the ways I needed to turn, and I found out by accident, really. I must have turned the wrong way once or twice. Doesn't surprise me, Charmain thought. Anyway, said Peter, I got to a place where there were hundreds of kobold ladies all washing teapots and stacking food on trays for breakfast and teas and things, and I was a bit nervous of them because of the way you'd annoyed them over the hydrangeas, but I tried to look pleasant as I went by and nodded and smiled and things, and I was really surprised when they all nodded and smiled back and said good morning in a perfectly friendly way. So I went on nodding and smiling and walking past until I came to a room I hadn't seen before. As soon as I opened the door, the first thing I saw was that vase of flowers sitting on the front of a long, long table. The next thing I saw was Wizard Norland sitting behind the table. Good gracious, said Charmain. It surprised me too, Peter admitted. I just stood there and stared. To tell the truth, he looked quite healthy, you know, strong and pink, and he had a lot more hair than I remembered, and he was busy working on the chart that was in the suitcase. He had it all spread out along the table, and he'd only filled in about a quarter of it. I suppose that gave me a clue. Anyway, he looked up and said quite politely, "Would you mind closing the door? There's quite a draft." Then before I could say anything, he looked up again and said, "Who on earth are you?" I said, "I'm Peter Regis." That made him frown. He said, "Regis, Regis? Does that make you some relation of the Witch of Montalbino, perhaps?" "She's my mother," I said. And he said, "I didn't think she had any children. She only has me," I said. "My dad was killed in a big avalanche at Transmontane just after I was born." He frowned some more and said, "But that avalanche was only last month, young man. They're saying that a Lubbock set it off, and it certainly killed a lot of people. Or are we talking about the avalanche 40 years ago?" And he looked very stem and disbelieving at me. I wondered how I could make him believe what had happened. I said, "I promise it's true. Some of your house must go back in time. It's where the afternoon teas disappeared to, and this should prove it. We put that vase of flowers on the trolley the other day, and it came back here to you." He looked at the vase, but he didn't say anything. I said, "I came here to your house because my mother arranged for me to be your apprentice." He said, "Did she indeed? I must have been wanting to oblige her quite badly then. You don't seem to me to have any remarkable talent." "I can do magic," I said, "but my mother can arrange anything when she wants to." He said, "True. She has a remarkably forceful personality. What did I say when you turned up?" "You didn't," I said. "You weren't there. A girl called Charmain Baker was looking after your house, or she was supposed to be, but she went off and worked for the king and met a fire demon." He interrupted me then, looking shocked. "A fire demon? Young man, those are very dangerous beings. Are you telling me that the Witch of the Waste will be in High Norland before long?" No, I said. "One of the royal wizards in Ingery did for the Witch of the Waste nearly 3 years ago now. This one was something to do with the king," Charmain said. "I suppose she's only just born from your point of view, but she said you were ill and the elves carried you off to cure you and her aunt. Sempronia arranged for Charmain to look after the house while you were gone." He looked quite upset about this. He sat back in his chair and blinked a bit. "I have a great niece called Sempronia," he said, sort of slowly and thinking about it. "This could be so. Sempronia has married into a very respectable family, I believe." "Oh, they are," I said. "You should just see Charmain's mother. She's so respectable she doesn't let Charmain do anything." Thank you very much, Peter," Charmain thought. "Now he thinks I'm a complete waste of space." "But he wasn't really interested," Peter went on. "He wanted to know what had made him ill, and I couldn't tell him. Do you know?" he asked Charmain. Charmain shook her head. Peter shrugged and said, then he sighed and said he supposed it didn't matter because it seemed to have been unavoidable. But after that, he said quite pathetically and all puzzled, "But I don't know any elves." I said, "Charmain said it was the king who sent the elves." "Oh," he said, and he looked much happier. "Of course it would be. The royal family has elf blood, several of them married elves, and the elves do keep up the connection, I believe." Then he looked at me and said, "So this story begins to hang together." I said, "Well, it should do. It's all true. But what I don't understand is what you did to make the kobolds so angry with you." "Nothing, I assure you," he said. "Kobolds are my friends. They have been for years. They do a great many tasks for me. I would no more anger a kobold than I would anger my friend the king." He seemed annoyed enough about this that I thought I'd better change the subject. I said, "Then can I ask you about this house? Did you build it or find it?" "Oh, found it," he said, "or at least I bought it when I was quite a young, struggling wizard because it seemed small and cheap. Then I found it was a labyrinth of many ways. It was a delightful discovery, I can tell you. It seems once to have belonged to a wizard Melicott, the same man who made the roof of the royal mansion appear to be gold. I have always hoped that somewhere inside this house there is hidden the actual gold that was in the royal treasury at the time. The king has been looking for that for years, you know." "And you can guess how that made me prick up my ears," Peter said. "But I never got to ask any more, because he said, looking at the vase on the table, 'So these are really flowers from the future then? Do you mind telling me what sort they are?" I was quite astonished he didn't know. I told him they were hydrangeas from his own garden. "The colored ones the kobolds cut off," I said, and he looked at them and murmured that they were quite magnificent, particularly the way they were so many different colors. "I shall have to start growing them for myself," he said. "They have more colors than roses. You can get them to grow blue, too," I said. "My mother uses a spell with copper powder for ours." And while he was murmuring about that, I asked him if I could take them back with me so that I could prove to you that I'd met him. "Certainly, certainly," he said. "They are rather in the way here. And tell your young lady who knows the fire demon that I hope to have my chart of the house finished by the time she is grown up enough to need it." "So," Peter said, "I took the flowers and came away. Wasn't that extraordinary?" "Very," said Charmain. "He wouldn't have grown hydrangeas if the kobolds hadn't cut them off and I hadn't picked them up and you hadn't got lost. It makes my head go round." She pushed aside her bowlful of cabbage and turnip. "I shall be nice to him. I shall. Peter, how would it be if I called in on my father on my way home tomorrow and asked him for a cookery book? He must have hundreds. He's the best cook in town." Peter looked utterly relieved. "Good idea," he said. "My mother's never told me much about cooking. She always does it all, and I shan't object to the way he's made Great Uncle William think of me." Charmain vowed, "I shall be kind. But if he does that once again—" Chapter 10, in which Twinkle takes to the roof. In the night, a worrying thought struck Charmain. If you could travel in time in Great Uncle William's house, what was to stop her arriving in the royal mansion 10 years ago to find that the king was not expecting her, or 10 years in the future to find that Prince Ludovic was ruling now, it was enough to make her decide to walk to the mansion in the usual way. So, the next morning Charmain set off along the road, with Waif pattering behind her, until they came by the cliff where the Lubbock's meadow was, when Waif became so breathless and pathetic that Charmain picked her up. As usual, Charmain thought, "I feel like a proper grown-up working girl," she added to herself as she strode toward town with Waif happily trying to lick her chin. It had rained in the night again, but now it was one of those mornings of pale blue sky and huge white clouds. The mountains were silky blues and greens, and in the town the sun glittered off wet cobbles and flared on the river. Charmain felt very contented. She was really looking forward to a day of sorting papers and chatting with the king. As she crossed Royal Square, the sun glared so off the golden roof of the royal mansion that Charmain was forced to look down at the cobbles. Waif blinked and ducked and then jumped as a loud squealing sound came from the mansion. "Look at me! Look at me!" Charmain looked, found her eyes full of tears from the dazzle, and looked again under a hand spared from Waif. The child Twinkle was sitting astride the golden roof, fully 100 feet in the air, waving merrily to her. He almost overbalanced doing it. At the sight, Charmain forgot all the unkind thoughts she had had about children yesterday. She dumped Waif on the cobbles and ran for the mansion door, where she clattered at the great knocker and rang the bell furiously. "That little boy!" she gasped at Sim, when he slowly and creakily opened the door. "Twinkle! He's sitting on the roof! Someone has to get him down!" "Is that so?" said Sim. He tottered out onto the steps. Charmain had to wait while he tottered to a place where he could see the roof and craned shakily upward. "Indeed he is, miss," he agreed. "Little demon, he'll fall. That roof is as slippery as ice." Charmain was jigging with impatience by then. "Send someone to fetch him in, quickly." "I don't know who," Sim said slowly. "Nobody much in this mansion climbs too well. I could send Jamal, I suppose, but with only the one eye, his balance is not too good." Waif was prancing about, yapping to be carried up the steps. Charmain ignored her. "Then send me," she said. "Just tell me how to get there. Now, before he slides off sideways." "Good notion," Sim agreed. "You take the stairs at the end of the hall, miss, and keep on going up. Last flight's wooden, and you'll find a small door." Charmain waited for no more. Leaving Waif to fend for herself, she raced off down the damp stone corridor until she came to the lobby with the stone stairs. There she began to climb for dear life, with her glasses bouncing on her chest and her footsteps ringing round the walls. Up she went 2 long flights, her mind filled with horrible thoughts of a small body plummeting down and hitting the cobbles with, well, a splash just about where she had left Waif. Panting hard, she hurried up a 3rd narrower flight. It seemed endless. Then she came to wooden stairs and clattered up those, almost out of breath. They seemed endless, too. At last she came to a small wooden door. Praying she was still in time, Charmain flung open the door onto a blaze of sunlight and gold. "I thought you were never coming," Twinkle said from the middle of the roof. He was wearing a pale blue velvet suit, and his golden hair blazed as bright as the roof. He seemed perfectly calm, more like a strayed angel than a small boy in trouble on a roof. "Are you very frightened?" Charmain panted anxiously. "Hold on very tight and don't move, and I'll crawl out and get you." "Please do that," Twinkle said politely. "He doesn't know the danger he's in." Charmain thought, "I shall have to keep very calm." Very cautiously she climbed out through the wooden door and maneuvered until she was sitting astride the roof like Twinkle. It was highly uncomfortable. Charmain did not know which was worse, the fact that the tin tiles were hot, wet, sharp, and slippery, or the way the roof seemed to be cutting her in two. When she snatched a sideways look at Royal Square, far, far below, she had to remind herself very seriously that she had worked a spell only 3 days ago that had saved her from the Lubbock and proved that she could fly. She might be able to grab Twinkle round his waist and float down with him. Here she realized that Twinkle was moving backward away from her as she worked her way toward him. "Stop that," she said. "Don't you know how dangerous this is?" "Of course I do," Twinkle retorted. "Hate scare me silly. But 'tis it the only place where I can talk to you without anyone overhearing. Just get yourself to the middle of the roof where I don't have to shout, and be quick. Princess Hilda hath hired a nursemaid for Morgan and me. The wretched girl will be along any minute now." This sounded so grown-up that Charmain blinked and stared at him. Twinkle smiled blindingly back, all big blue eyes and enchanting rosy lips. "Are you an infant genius or something?" she asked him. "Well, I am now," Twinkle said. "When I was really 6 years old, I was about average, I think. With a strong gift for magic, of course. Move along, can't you?" "I'm trying." Charmain set herself to shunting along the roof until she was only a foot or so away from the child. "So what are we supposed to be talking about?" She snapped into his face. "With our Norland fur," Twinkle said. "They tell me you know him." "Not really," Charmain said. "He's my great-aunt by marriage's great-uncle. I'm keeping house for him while he's ill." She did not feel like mentioning Peter. "And what is his house like?" Twinkle asked. He added chattily, "I live in a moving castle myself." "Does Norland's house move?" "No," said Charmain. "But there's a door in the middle that takes you to about 100 different rooms. They say Wizard Melicott made it." "Ah, Melicott," Twinkle piped. He seemed very pleased. "Then I'll probably need to come and thee it, whatever count of a faith. Is that all right?" "I suppose so," Charmain said. "Why?" "Because," Twinkle explained, "Sophie, Calcifer, and I have been hired to find out what became of the gold in the king's treasury. At least, we think that's what they're wanting, but they're not being very clear. Half the time they seem to be saying that what they've lost is something called the elf gift, and nobody knows what this elf gift is. And the princess has asked Sophie to find out what keeps happening to the money from the taxes, and that seems to be something different again. They've sold a lot of pictures and other things, and they're till at poor church mice. You must have noticed." Charmain nodded. "I noticed. Couldn't they ask for more taxes? Or sell some of their library?" Twinkle suggested. He shrugged. This made him sway about so precariously that Charmain shut her eyes. "Calcifer nearly got ordered to leave last night when he suggested selling tone books, and aft for taxes. The king saith high Norland people are well off and contented, and any extra tax money would probably just disappear too. Though that's no good, what I want you to do—" There was a shout down in the distance. Charmain opened her eyes and looked sideways. Quite a number of people had gathered in the square, all shading their eyes and pointing to the roof. "Hurry up," she said. "They'll be calling out the fire brigade any minute now." "Do they have one?" Twinkle asked. "They're civil as you are here?" He smiled another of his blazing smiles. "What we need you to do? Are you two quite happy out here?" a voice asked close behind Charmain. It was so near and so sudden that Charmain jumped and all but overbalanced. "Watch it, Thuffy," Twinkle said urgently. "You nearly had her off then. That just goes to show what a harebrained scheme this was even for you," Sophie said. By the sound she was leaning out of the wooden door, but Charmain did not dare turn round to look. "Have you done the magic I gave you?" Twinkle asked, leaning sideways to talk round Charmain. "Yes, I have," Sophie said. "Everyone's running around the mansion fussing. Calcifer's trying to stop that silly nursemaid having hysterics, and someone outside has just called the firemen in. I managed to slip into the library with your spell in the confusion. Satisfied?" "Perfectly." Twinkle gave another angelic smile. "You thee how cunning my plan wath now." He leaned toward Charmain. "What I've done," he said to her, "is to cast a spell that maketh every book or piles of paper that hath the slightest bearing on the king's problem light up with a light that only you can thee. When you spot a lighted one, I want you to make a note of which it is and what it saith. Secretly, of course. Something's definitely wrong here, and we don't want anyone to know what you're doing in case they get to the Perthon causing the trouble. Can you do that for "I suppose so," said Charmain. It sounded easy enough, although she did not like the idea of keeping secrets from the king. "When do you want my notes?" "Tonight, please, before that princely heir gets here," Sophie said from behind Charmain. "There's no need to get him mixed up in this, and we're very grateful, and it truly is important. It's the reason why we're here. Now, for goodness sake, come inside, both of you, before they start putting up ladders." "All right," Twinkle piped. "Here we go. I may arrive in 2 hours, mind you." "Serve you right," said Sophie. The roof started to buck and ripple under Charmain. She nearly screamed, but she clung on with both hands, reminding herself that she really could fly, couldn't she? And the roof jiggled and rippled her backward toward the way she had come out, while in front of her, Twinkle jiggled onward too. In moments, Charmain felt Sophie take hold of her under her armpits and lug her backward with a bit of a scramble inside the royal mansion again. Sophie then leaned out and seized Twinkle and dumped him down beside Charmain. Twinkle looked soulfully up at Charmain. "Back to infancy again," he said, sighing. "You won't give me away, will you?" "Oh, cut out the nonsense," Sophie said. "Charmain's all right," she said to Charmain. "His name's Howell, really, and he's enjoying himself quite disgustingly much, having his second childhood. Come along, my little man." She swept Twinkle up under one arm and carried him away down the stairs. There was a lot of kicking and screaming. Charmain followed them, shaking her head. On the main landing halfway down, everyone in the mansion seemed to be gathered, including a number of people Charmain had not seen before, with Calcifer bobbing this way and that among them. Even the king was there, carrying waif in an absent-minded way. Princess Hilda pushed aside a fat young woman who was holding Morgan and sobbing, and shook Charmain's hand. "My dear Miss Charming, thank you so very much. We were in such a panic. Sim, go and tell the firemen we don't need the ladders, and we certainly don't need the hoses." Charmain could hardly hear her. Waif had seen Charmain, and she promptly leaped from the king's arms, yapping with hysterical relief that Charmain was safe. From somewhere in the background, Jamal's dog answered with mournful howlings. The fat nursemaid went sniff. "Hoo!" Morgan bellowed, "Oof, oof," and everyone else jabbered. In the distance, Twinkle was yelling, "I am not naughty. I was very frightened, I tell you." Charmain cut down some of the noise by scooping Waif up. Princess Hilda silenced most of the rest by clapping her hands and saying, "Back to work, everyone! Nancy, take Morgan away before he deafens us all, and make it very clear to him that he is not going out on the roof too. Sophie dear, can you shut Twinkle up?" Everyone moved away. Twinkle went, "I am not a naughty," and then stopped as if a hand had been clapped across his mouth. In next to no time, Charmain found herself walking down the rest of the stairs with the king, on the way to the library, with Waif ecstatically trying to lick her chin. "It takes me right back," the king remarked. "I got out on the roof several times when I was a boy. Never failed to cause a silly panic. Firemen nearly hosed me off once by mistake. Boys will be boys, my dear. Are you ready to get down to work, or will you want to sit and recover a bit?" "No, I'm fine," Charmain assured him. She felt completely at home today as she settled into her seat in the library, surrounded by the smell of old books, with Waif toasting her tummy at the brazier, and the king sitting opposite, investigating a ragged pile of old diaries. So peaceful was it that Charmain all but forgot about Twinkle's spell. She became immersed in peeling apart a damp pile of old letters. They were all from a long-ago prince who was breeding horses and wanted his mother to coax more money out of the king. The prince was just feelingly describing the beauties of the new foal his best mare had given birth to, when Charmain looked up to see the fire demon flickering slowly this way and that around the library. "Just exploring," Calcifer answered in his small, crackling voice. "I understand now why you might not want to sell these books." "Indeed," said the king. "Tell me, do fire demons read much?" "Not generally," Calcifer replied. "Sophie reads to me quite often. I like the kind of story with puzzles in, where you have to guess who did the murder. Have you any of those in here?" "Probably not," said the king. "But my daughter is partial to murder mysteries, too. Perhaps you should ask her." "Thank you. I will," Calcifer said, and vanished. The king shook his head and went back to his diaries, and as if Calcifer had given Twinkle's spell a jog, Charmain instantly noticed that the diary the king was flipping through was glowing a faint pale green. So was the next thing in her own pile, which was a rather squashed scroll, done up with tarnished golden tape. Charmain took a large breath and asked, "Anything interesting in that diary, sire?" "Well," said the king, "it's rather nasty, really. This is the diary of one of my great-grandmother's ladies-in-waiting, full of gossip. Just now, she's dreadfully shocked because the king's sister died giving birth to a son, and the midwife seems to have killed the baby, said it was purple and it frightened her. They're going to put the poor silly soul on trial for murder." Charmain's mind flew to herself and Peter looking up Lubbock and Great-Uncle William's encyclopedia. She said, "I suppose she thought the baby was a Lubbocken." "Yes, very superstitious and ignorant," the king said. "No one believes in Lubbokins these days." He went back to reading. Charmain wondered whether to say that long-ago midwife may have been quite right. Lubbocks existed. Why not Lubbokins too? But she was sure the king would not believe her, and she scribbled a note about it instead. Then she picked up the squashed scroll, but before she unrolled it, it occurred to her to look along the row of boxes where she had put the papers she had already read, in case any of them glowed too. Only one did, quite faintly. When Charmain pulled it out, she found it was the bill from Wizard Melicott for making the roof look like gold. This was puzzling, but Charmain made a note about that too before she finally undid the tarnished gold tape and spread the scroll out. It was a family tree of the kings of High Norland, rather scribbly and hasty, as if it was only a plan for a much more careful copy. Charmain had trouble reading it. It was full of crossings out and little arrows leading to scribbled additions and lopsided circles with notes inside them. "Sire," she said, "can you explain this to me? Let's see." The king took the scroll and spread it out on the table. "Ah," he said, "we've got the fair copy of this hanging in the throne room. I haven't properly looked at it for years, but I know it's much plainer than this family tree, just names of rulers and who they married and so on. This one seems to have notes on it, written by several different people by the looks of it. See, Here's my ancestor, Adolphus I. The note beside him is in really old writing. It says, raised walls to the town by virtue of the elf gift. Not much sign of those walls nowadays, is there? But they say that Embankment Street down beside the river is part of the old walls. Excuse me, sire, Charmain interrupted, but what is the elf gift? No idea, my dear, the king said. I wish I knew. It was said to bring prosperity and protection to the kingdom, whatever it was, but it seems to have vanished long ago. This is fascinating. The king ran his large finger across to one note after another. Here, beside my ancestor's wife, it says, was elf woman, so called. They always told me that Queen Matilda was only half elf, but here is her son, Hans Nicholas, labeled as elf child, so maybe that's why he never got to be king. Nobody really trusts elves. Great mistake, in my opinion. They crowned Hans Nicholas' son instead, a very boring person called Adolphus II, who never did anything much. He's the one king on this scroll who doesn't have a note beside him. Tells you something. But his son, here he is, Hans Peter Adolphus, he has a note that says, reaffirm the safety of the realm in partnership with the elf gift, whatever that means. My dear, this is so interesting. Would you do me the favor of making a good readable copy of all these people's names and the notes beside them? You can miss out cousins and things if they don't have notes. Would you mind very much? Not at all, sire, Charmain said. She had been wondering how she could write all this down secretly for Sophie and Twinkle, and this was how. She spent the rest of that day making 2 copies of the scroll. One was a muddly first draft, where she was constantly having to ask the king about this note or that one, and the second copy was in her best writing for the king himself. She became as interested as the king was. Why did Hans Peter III's nephew take to banditry in the hills, what made Queen Gertrude a witch to be feared? And why was her daughter Princess Isola labeled Bloomin' Lover? The king could not answer those questions, but he said he had a good idea why Prince Nicholas Adolphus was labeled Drunkardate. Had Charmain looked at where it said the prince's father, Peter Hans IV, was called a dark tyrant and a wizard besides? Some of my ancestors were not nice people, he said. I bet this one bullied poor Nicholas horribly. They tell me it can be like that when elf blood goes sour, but I think it's just people, really. Quite late in the day, when Charmain was down near the bottom of the scroll where nearly every ruler seemed to be called Adolphus, or Adolphus Nicholas, or Ludovic Adolphus, she was fascinated to come upon a princess, Moina, who married a great lord of Strangia, but died giving birth to a loathsome lubberkin. Charmain was sure Moina was the one in the lady-in-waiting's diary. It looked as if someone had believed the midwife's story. She decided not to mention this to the king. 3 lines farther down she came upon the king himself, much lost among his books, and Princess Hilda refused marriage with a king, 3 lords, and a wizard. They were rather squeezed to one side to make room for the descendants of the king's uncle, Nicholas Peter, who seemed to have had a great many children. The children's children filled the whole bottom row. How on earth do they remember who is which? Charmain wondered. Half the girls were called Matilda, and the other half Isola, while the boys were mostly Hans or Hans Adolphus. You could only tell them apart by the tiny scribbled notes, calling one Hans a great lout, drowned, and another murdered by accident, and yet another died abroad. The girls were worse. One Matilda was a tedious, proud girl, another to be feared like Q Gertrude, and a third of no good nature. The Isolas were all either poison or of evil ways. The king's heir, Ludovic Nicholas, stood out from what Charmain began to think was a truly dreadful family by having no note beside him at all, like the dull Adolphus of long ago. She wrote it all out, names, notes, and all. By the end of the afternoon, her right forefinger was quite numb and blue with ink. "Thank you, my dear," the king said as Charmain handed him her good copy. He started reading through it so eagerly that Charmain was easily able to gather up her scribbly copy and her other notes and cram them into her pockets, without the king seeing. As she stood up, the king looked up to say, "I hope you will forgive me, my dear. I shall not be needing you for the next 2 days. The princess insists that I come out of the library and play host to young Prince Ludovic this weekend. She is not at her best with male visitors, you know. But I shall see you again on Monday, I hope." "Yes, of course," Charmain said. She collected Waif, who came pottering toward her from the kitchen, and set off toward the front door, wondering what to do with her copy of the scroll. She was not sure she trusted Twinkle. Could you trust someone who looked like a little boy and obviously wasn't? Quite. And then there's what Peter said, Great Uncle William said, about fire demons. Can you trust someone that dangerous? She thought unhappily as she went. She found herself face to face with Sophie. "How did it go? Did you find anything?" Sophie asked, smiling at her. It was such a friendly smile that Charmain decided she could trust Sophie anyway, she hoped. "I got some things," she said, pulling papers out of her pockets. Sophie took them even more eagerly and gratefully than the king had taken his good copy. "Marvelous," she said. "These should at least give us a clue. We're really in the dark at the moment. Twinkle says divining spells just don't seem to work here. And that's odd because I don't think either the king or the princess do magic, do you? Enough to block a divining spell, No," Charmain said. "But a lot of their ancestors did, and there's more to the king than meets your eye." "You're right," said Sophie. "Are you able to stay and go through these notes with us?" "Ask me things on Monday," Charmain told her. "I have to go and see my father before his bakery closes." Chapter 11, in which Charmain kneels on a cake. The shop was closed when Charmain reached it, but she could see, dimly through the glass, someone moving about inside cleaning up. Charmain rapped on the door, and when that did no good, put her face to the glass and shouted, "Let me in!" The person inside at length shuffled over and opened the door enough to put his face round it. He proved to be an apprentice about Peter's age, whom Charmain had never met. "We're closed," he said. His eyes went to Waif in Charmain's arms. The open door had let out a gust of recent donut smells, and Waif had her nose into it, sniffing rapturously. "And we don't allow dogs," he said. "I need to see my father," Charmain said. "You can't see anyone," the apprentice said. "The bakehouse is still busy." "My father is Mr. Baker," Charmain told him, "and I know he'll see me. Let me in." "How do I know that's the truth?" the apprentice said suspiciously. "It's as much as my job's worth." Charmain knew this was the sort of time when she needed to be polite and tactful, but she ran out of patience, just as she had with the kobolds. "Oh, you silly boy," she interrupted him. "If my father knew you weren't letting me in, he'd sack you on the spot. Go and fetch him if you don't believe me." "Hoity-toity," said the apprentice, but he backed away from the door, saying, "Come in then, but you leave the dog outside, understand?" "No, I don't," Charmain said. "She might be stolen. She's a highly valuable magical dog, I'll have you know, and even the king lets her in. If he can, so can you." Looked scornful. "Tell that to the Lubbock on the hills, he." Things might have become very difficult then if Belle, one of the ladies who served in the shop, had not come in through the bakehouse door just then. She was tying on her headscarf and saying, "I'm leaving now, Timmy. Mind you wash down all the—" when she saw Charmain. "Oh, hallo, Charmain. Want to see your dad, do you?" "Hallo, Belle. Yes, I do," Charmain said, "but he won't let me bring Waif in." Belle looked at Waif. Her face melted into a smile. "What a sweet little creature. But you know what your dad thinks of dogs coming in here. Better leave her in the shop for Timmy to look after. You'll take care of her, won't you, Timmy?" The apprentice made a grudging noise and glowered at Charmain. "But I warn you, Charmain," Belle continued in her usual chatty way, "they're very busy through there. There's an order on for a special cake. So you won't stay long, will you? Put your little dog down here and she'll be quite safe. And Timmy, I want those shelves cleaned down properly this time, or I'll have words to say to you tomorrow. Ta-ra, night-night." Belle swept out of the shop, and Charmain swept past her into it. Charmain did have thoughts of sweeping onward into the bakehouse with Waif, but she knew Waif's record with food was not good. So she deposited Waif beside the counter, gave Timmy a cold nod, and he'll hate me for the rest of his life, she thought, and stalked on alone past the empty glass cases and the cool marble shelves and the clusters of white tables and chairs, where the citizens of High Norland were accustomed to sit for coffee and rich cakes. Waif gave a desperate whine as Charmain pushed open the bakehouse door, but Charmain hardened her heart and pushed the door shut behind herself. It was busy as a hive in there, and tropically hot and full of scents that would certainly have driven Waif mad with greed. There was the smell of new dough and dough cooking, the sweet scent of buns and tarts and waffles, overlaid with savory smells from pasties and quiches, which were all overlaid in turn by strong odors of cream and flavored icing from the large, many-layered cake that several people were decorating on the table nearest the door. Rose water, Charmain thought, inhaling those scents. Lemon, strawberry, almonds from South Ingery, cherries, and peaches. Mr. Baker was striding from worker to worker, instructing, encouraging, and inspecting as he went. "Jake, you have to put your back into kneading that dough," Charmain heard him saying as she came in, and a moment later, a light hand with that pastry, Nancy. "Don't hammer it, or it'll be like a rock." A moment after that, he was off down to the baking ovens at the other end, telling the young man there which oven to use, and wherever he went, he got instant attention and obedience. Her father, Charmain knew, was a king in his bakehouse, more of a king than the real king in the royal mansion, she thought. His white hat sat on his head like a crown. It suited him too, Charmain thought. He was thin-faced and ginger-haired like she was herself, though much more freckly. She ran him down by the stoves, where he was tasting a savory meat filling and telling the girl making that there was too much spice in it. "It tastes good, though," the girl protested. Maybe," said Mr. Baker, "but there's a world of difference between a good taste and a perfect one, Lorna. You cut along and help them with the cake, or they'll be at it all night, and I'll have a go rescuing this filling." He took the saucepan off the flames as Lorna hurried off looking mightily relieved. He turned round with it and saw Charmain. "Hello, sweetheart! I wasn't expecting you." A slight doubt came over him. "Did your mother send you?" "No," Charmain said. "I came by myself. I'm looking after Great Uncle William's house. Remember?" "Oh, so you are," her father said. "What can I do for you?" Charmain said. This was hard to say now that she had been reminded what an expert her father was. He said just a moment, and turned to search through rows of powdered herbs and spices on a shelf beside the stoves. He selected a jar, uncapped it, and shook just a sprinkle of something into the saucepan. He stirred the mixture, tasted it, and nodded. "That'll do now," he said, putting the saucepan down to cool. Then he looked questioningly at Charmain. "I don't know how to cook, Dad," she blurted out, "and the food for the evening comes raw in Great Uncle William's house. You don't happen to have any instructions written down, do you? For apprentices or something?" Mr. Baker pulled at his freckly chin with his clean hand, thinking. "I always told your mother you'd need to know some of those things," he said. "Respectable or not. Let's see. Most of what I've got will be a bit advanced for you. Patisserie and gourmet sauces and such. I expect my apprentices to come to me knowing the basics these days. But I think I still may have some of the elementary simple notes from back when I started. Let's go and see, shall we?" He led the way across the bakehouse among the thronging, busy cooks to the far wall. There were a few rickety shelves there, piled higgledy-piggledy with notebooks, pieces of paper with jam stains on them, and fat files covered with floury fingerprints. "Wait a moment," Mr. Baker said, pausing by the leftovers table beside these shelves. "I better give you some food to go on with while you're reading up on it, hadn't I?" Charmain knew this table well. Waif would have loved it. On it were any pieces of baking that had not turned out quite perfect, broken tarts, lopsided buns, and cracked pasties, together with all the things from the shop that had not been sold that day. The bakehouse workers were allowed to carry these home if they wanted. Mr. Baker picked up one of the sacking bags the workers used and began swiftly filling it. A whole cream cake went in at the bottom, followed by a layer of pasties, then buns, donuts, and finally a large cheese flan. He left the bulging bag on the table while he searched about on the shelves. "Here we are," he said, pulling forth a floppy brown notebook dark with old grease. "I thought I still had it. This was from when I started as a lad in a restaurant on Marketplace. I was as ignorant as you are then, so it should be just what you need. Do you want the spells that go with the recipes?" Mr. Baker looked as guilty as Charmain had ever seen him. His freckles for a moment were drowned in redness. I know, Charmain. Your mother would have 70 fits. She will insist that magic is low, vulgar stuff, but I was born a magic user, and I can't help myself, not when I'm cooking. We use magic all the time here in the bakehouse. Be a good, kind girl and don't let your mother know, please." He pulled a thin yellow notebook off the shelves and flapped it wistfully. "These in here are all plain, simple spells that work. Do you want this?" "Yes, please," Charmain said. "And of course I won't say a word to Mother. I know what she's like as well as you do." "Good girl," said Mr. Baker. He swiftly slid both notebooks down into the bag beside the cheese flan and passed Charmain the bag. They grinned at one another like conspirators. "Happy eating," Mr. Baker said. "Good luck." "You too," Charmain said. "And thank you, Dad." She stretched up and kissed him on his flowery, freckled cheek, just below the cook's hat, and then made her way out of the bakehouse. "You lucky thing," Lorna called out to her while Charmain was pushing open the door. "I had my eye on that cream cake he gave you. There were 2 of them," Charmain called over her shoulder as she went through into the shop. There, to her surprise, she found Timmy sitting on the glass and marble counter with Waif in his arms. He explained rather defensively, "She was really upset when you left her, started howling her head off. Perhaps we won't be lifelong enemies after all," Charmain thought as Waif leaped out of Timmy's arms, shrieking with delight. She danced about Charmain's ankles and generally made such a noise that Timmy evidently did not hear Charmain thank him. Charmain made sure to give a great smile and to nod at him as she went out into the street with Waif frisking and squeaking round her feet. The shop and bakehouse were on the other side of the town from the river and the embankment. Charmain could have cut across to there, but it was shorter, with Waif having to walk because Charmain was carrying the bulging bag to go along High Street instead. High Street, although it was one of the main streets, was far from seeming that way. It was twisting and narrow, with no sidewalks, but the shops on either side were some of the best. Charmain walked slowly along, looking into shops to give Waif time to keep up, dodging late shoppers and people just strolling before supper, and thinking. Her thoughts were divided between satisfaction. Peter has no excuse now for making any more horrible food, and amazement. Dad is a magic user. He always has been. Up until then, Charmain had felt a lot of hidden guilt at the way she had experimented with the Boke Opalimpsest, but she found that had gone now. "I think I may have inherited Dad's magic." "Oh, great! Then I know I can do spells. But why does Dad always do what Mother says? He insists on me being respectable as much as Mother does. Honestly, parents," Charmain found she was feeling very jolly altogether about this. At this point there was a tremendous clatter of horse hoofs coming up behind her, mixed with rumbling and deep shouts of, "Clear the way! Clear the way!" Charmain glanced round and found riders in some kind of uniform filling the street, coming so fast that they were almost on top of her already. People on foot were flattening themselves against shops and walls on either side of the street. Charmain whirled round, reaching for Waif. She tripped over someone's doorstep and half knelt on the bag of food, but she got Waif and managed not to drop the bag. Holding Waif in the bag in both arms, she backed against the nearest wall, while horses' legs and men's feet in stirrups pounded past in front of her nose. Those were followed by a whole string more of galloping horses, shining black ones in long leather traces, and a whip cracking across their backs. After them a great colorful coach thundered by, glinting with gold and glass and painted shields, with 2 men in feathered hats swaying on the back of it. This was followed by yet more uniforms on horses, galloping deafeningly. Then they were gone, away down the street and round the next bend. Waif whimpered. Charmain sagged against the wall. "What on earth was that?" she said to the person flattened against the wall beside her. "That," said the woman, "was Crown Prince Ludovic, on his way to visit the king, I suppose." She was a fair and slightly fierce-looking lady, who reminded Charmain just a little of Sophie Pendragon. She was clutching a small boy, who might have reminded Charmain of Morgan, except that he was not making any noise at all. He looked to be shock white, rather the way Charmain felt herself. "He ought to know better than to go that fast in a narrow street like this," Charmain said angrily. "Someone could have been hurt." She looked into her bag and discovered that the flan had broken in half and folded up, which made her angrier than ever. "Why couldn't he have gone down the embankment where it's wide?" she said. "Doesn't he care?" "Not a lot," said the woman. "Then I shudder to think what he'll be like when he's king," Charmain said. "He's going to be dreadful." Her strange, meaningful stare. "I didn't hear you say that." "Why?" asked Charmain. "Ludovic doesn't like criticism," the woman said. "He has lubberkins to enforce his feelings." "Lubberkins, you hear, girl? Let's hope I was the only one who heard what you said." She heaved the little boy higher in her arms and walked away. Charmain thought about this as she trudged through the town with Waif under one arm and the bag pulling at the other. She found herself hoping hard that her king, Adolphus X, would go on living for a very long time. "Or I might have to start a revolution," she thought. "And my goodness, it feels a long way to Great Uncle William's house today." She got there in the end, however, and put Waif down thankfully on the garden path. Indoors, Peter was in the kitchen, sitting on one of the 10 bags of laundry, staring moodily at a big red slab of meat on the table. Beside it were 3 onions and 2 carrots. "I don't know how to cook these," he said. "You don't have to," Charmain said, dumping her bag on the table. "I went to see my father this evening. And here," she added, fishing out the 2 notebooks, "are recipes and the spells that go with them." Both notebooks were rather the worse for Flan. Charmain wiped them on her skirt and handed them over. Peter brightened up wonderfully and jumped off the laundry bag. "That's really useful," he said, "and a bag of food is better." Charmain unpacked bent flan, broken pasties, and squash buns. The cream cake at the bottom had a knee-shaped dent in it, and it had oozed into some of the pasties. This made her angry with Prince Ludovic all over again. She told Peter all about it while she tried to reassemble the pasties. "Yes, my mother says he's got the makings of a real tyrant," Peter said a little absently because he was flipping through the notebooks. "She says that's why she left this country. Do I do these spells while I cook the food, or before, or after, do you know?" Dad didn't say. "You'll have to work it out," Charmain said, and went away to Great Uncle William's study to find a soothing book to read. The 12-branched wand was interesting, but it made her feel as though her mind had broken into 100 little pieces. Each branch of the wand had 12 more branches growing out of it, and 12 more from each of those. Much more, and I'd turn into a tree, Charmain thought as she searched the shelves. She chose a book called The Magician's Journey, which she hoped would be an adventure story. And it was, in a way, but she very soon realized that it was also a step-by-step account of how a magician learned his skills. This set her thinking again of how Dad had turned out to be a magic user. "And I know I've inherited it," she thought. "I learned to fly, and I mended the pipes in the bathroom, all in no time. But I ought to learn how to do it smoothly and quietly instead of shouting and bullying things." She was still sitting, pondering this, when Peter yelled to her to come and eat. "I used the spells," he said. He was very proud of himself. He had warmed up the pasties and made a truly tasty mixture of the onions and carrots. "And," he added, "I was quite tired after a day of exploring." "Looking for gold?" Charmain said. "It's the natural thing to do," Peter said. We know it's somewhere in this house, but what I found instead was the place where the kobolds live. It's like a huge cave, and they were all in there making things. Cuckoo clocks mostly, but some of them were making teapots, and some more were making something like a sofa near the entrance. I didn't speak to them. I didn't know if they were in the past or nowadays, so I just smiled and watched. I didn't want them angry again. What did you do today? Oh, goodness, Charmain said. It was quite a day. It started with Twinkle out on the roof. I was so scared, and she told him all the rest. Peter frowned. This Twinkle, he said, and this Sophie, are you quite sure they're not up to something sinister? Wizard Norland said fire demons were dangerous beings, you know. I did wonder, Charmain admitted, but I think they're all right. It looks as if Princess Hilda has called them in to help. I wish I knew how to find what the king is looking for. He got so excited when I found that family tree. Did you know that Prince Ludovic has 8 second cousins, mostly called Hans and Isola, and nearly all of them have met with sticky ends because they were all bad lots, Peter said. My mother says that Hans the Cruel was poisoned by Isola the murderess, and she was killed by Hans the Drunkard when he was drunk. Then that Hans fell downstairs and broke his neck. His sister Isola was hanged over in Strangia for trying to kill the lord she married there. How many am I up to? Those are 2 Matildas and another Hans, Peter said. Hans Nicholas, that one was, and I don't know how he died, except that he was somewhere abroad when he did. One of the Matildas was burned when her manor house caught fire, and they say the other one is such a dangerous witch that Prince Ludovic has her shut up in an attic in Casteljoa. Nobody dares go near her, not even Prince Ludovic. She kills people just by looking at them. Is it all right that I gave Waif that lump of meat? Probably, said Charmain, if she didn't choke. How do you know all about these cousins? I'd never heard of them before today. That's because I come from Montalbino, Peter said. Everyone at my school knows all about the 9 bad cousins of High Norland. But I suppose that in this country, neither the king nor Prince Ludovic wanted to get about that their relatives were so vile. They say Prince Ludovic is as bad as the rest, too. And we're such a nice country, really, Charmain protested. She felt quite hurt that her own High Norland should have given birth to 9 such awful people. It seemed hard on the king as well. Chapter 12 concerns laundry and Lubbock eggs. Charmain woke early the following day because Waif stuck her small cold nose into Charmain's ear, obviously thinking they needed to go to the royal mansion as usual.